Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Improving's Virtual Lunch and Learn. Before we get started, I want to inform you about a feature that's in the presentation that'll make the session much more interactive. So take note of the question mark icon in the upper right-hand corner of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open up the question and answer feature, which will allow you to send questions to me so I can deliver them to our presenter at the appropriate time. Without further ado, we'd like to welcome Bethany Hilton, Business Development Manager with Improving, who's going to be sharing power networking with us. Bethany, it's yours.
Hello. Thank you everyone for spending some time with us on this Friday morning/afternoon. I'm excited to share a little bit with you about my philosophy of how to develop a power network, what that looks like, and how we can really make a difference with it. So, building a power network. Well, first, I guess I can introduce a little bit more about myself. I'm originally from New York. I've been working with Improving for 5.5 years and have just had a really incredible experience spending time with the leaders at this company, learning from them, and then getting to do interesting work that I love. I actually got connected to the company through networking as well. So it has a special place in my heart that I've been able to find such a good career home through the things that I'm going to share with you today. Building a power network. Before we talk too much about it, I want to make sure we all are on the same page for a definition. Now, this is not a dictionary definition. This is really my own definition, but I think we can all agree on that and move forward with it, because what I want to share with you today is my approach and what I found successful. For me, a power network is not about the business cards or LinkedIn connections, how many people you know on paper, but it's more about a strong connected group of individuals that you have relationships with, that you have meaningful connections where you're able to reach out to them if something happens. You're able to support them in what they're trying to do personally and professionally, and the same for vice versa. So it's not just about having all of those online connections. It's really about making sure these people are connected and bonded to you in some sort of human way. My approach, I could talk to you a lot about tips and tactics, different behaviors, how to say something, how to write an email, but probably most of you have a good handle on that, and or there's definitely lots of resources for that. What I want to talk about today is the approach before you get to behaviors. So understanding what is my mindset, how am I thinking about networking first? Because really, if we're able to shift our mindset, then the behaviors come much more easily. So if, for example, we're trying to connect with a new person and we reached out to them on email and they never responded, if our mindset is that we are bothering people with emails and they're overwhelmed and don't want to talk to us, then we're less likely to continue following up with them and check on them to get that conversation. But if we really spend the time to think about what if we had and tried on a new mindset. So what if we thought about the fact that maybe their email inbox is a little bit chaotic. They've got 1,000 unread emails. They read it and wanted to respond, but never got a chance. So then that mindset is going to drive a different behavior for you. Your behavior might be, oh, I'm actually helping them by following up. So both of these philosophies and this mindset drives completely different behavior. As we get into the discussion this afternoon, I want to make sure that we question and think through what is our mindset as it relates to the behaviors we're trying to accomplish, because our mindset drives our behaviors, which drives the actions we're going to get and our results. And obviously, we're all looking for certain kinds of results. Now, why even bother? It's easy to not even try to network, or some people have never tried, don't consider it important, but all of you are here today to learn about it. So you must hold that it has some sort of importance to you. So as I'm talking, if you can just pop into the chat and Max will kind of read them out, but I want to know from each of you, really, what are some of the reasons that you're interested in networking? What are some of the reasons that you think that this is an important discussion and something that you want to learn about? Because again, if we don't have motivation for doing this, if we're not clear about our purpose, then going through the challenges of learning how to do it better and well, we're going to be less motivated. So feel free to add into the group chat and I'll continue talking about this, but Max, once you have some answers, you can share them with me. So I often speak to college students about this, and I talk about how 80% of jobs are found through networking. Most of the best jobs never end up on the job boards because we're looking for somebody within our organization, and the first thing we do is ask all of our coworkers and colleagues, do you know anyone for this position? So people that are looking for really cool opportunities, internships, all of those kinds of things, it's so much more about the people that you know and what they know than it is about being able to, skim the internet. And it gives you a leg up because if there's trust with a certain individual, I trust my coworkers. So if I trust my coworkers to provide good people to me, then immediately you come into the situation, if you do get referred, with a lot more trust. So knowing that networking and finding really good jobs is a big piece of that is something that I often share. There's many other valuable things that can come from networking. You can learn new skills, you can be introduced to new and different ideas about the world. There's a lot of education that can happen. So there's a myriad of reasons that make this a really important topic. And I found personally that it's enriched my life in many ways. I've found really close friends through it. I've gotten to experience different countries and different philosophies based on networking. So there's a lot that can come into this. But Max, did you have any comments that you wanted to share?
Yeah, we had actually a couple of things that came in. The first one was, I'm interested in learning how not to feel uncomfortable. They wrote uncomfortable with networking. Any tips?
Great. Okay, we're going to get into that really quick. So that's perfect. The next question is what makes it difficult, right? So again, feel free to put your questions in the chat and or your comments about this. But as you're thinking about what makes it difficult, a lot of times it feels very uncomfortable, right? It feels fake, salesy, forced, awkward. And even if you are really good at networking, it can sometimes feel extremely transactional. Like, hey, what do you need help with? Cool. Now here's what I need from you. And it starts to feel less like a connection, less like a human interaction, and more of this kind of contract of, I'll give you this, you'll give me that. And we start to lose that feeling of, well, this is a human being I'm talking to, right? So a lot of the ways that we can think about this can lead us to having these uncomfortable conversations. So it can be very difficult. But what I'm hoping to do is change how we think about networking so that we don't feel these same experiences. Anything before I go to the next slide, Max?
Yeah, we did have another one, and it's more of a comment that I think is good. We like to have these kind of discussions versus really just question. We want to feel like it's back and forth. So, Kale wrote, motivation is to be able to gain and share knowledge with other professionals. Also, networking is the primary means of learning about opportunities that are available.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and that fits right in. It's extremely important, even just knowing what's going on. There's so many things that we can't find just by Googling, unfortunately, although we can find a lot. So this current thinking that we have, that it's uncomfortable, it's superficial, that even the idea that you have to be really good at talking, you have to be this extroverted, larger than life personality that you can make a whole room laugh, and that if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to network or build this strong, connected group of people that care about you professionally. So that's kind of the current thinking, right? Very awkward, fake, uncomfortable, transactional. Now, if I can give you a new way of thinking about it, hopefully this will start to shift some of those uncomfortable feelings, right? So rather than thinking about business networking as what do you all have to offer me? Like, where are you and what's your position in the company? What's your title? How should I operate based on that? Oh, you're the CEO. That means something different than someone else in the organization. We start to create hierarchies of people and we start to interact with them differently. And usually the idea behind it is just what's in it for me, right? But if we completely flip that model and we think about the other individual and not just what's in it for them either, because that's still fairly transactional, but rather If you think about the last time you met up with your best friend, right? You weren't thinking, okay, what opportunities do they have at their company, and how much are they worth, and where? No, you're just so excited to see this human being that you have a connection to. And so if we set aside all of these frameworks that we built around this person, and we look at them as a holistic person, realizing that this person has hopes and dreams and fears, they have all of these interesting things going on in their lives that are a part of them. So it's not just that we look at the professional aspects and we say, okay, they're a director here and this is what they do and that's who they become. But rather, each individual is so complex and so beautiful in that they have unique experiences. They've lived however many years on this planet, and they probably saw and experienced different things than you did. They probably have different ideas than you have. And then because of that, right, they might have different personalities, skills, strengths, talents, so much that is a part of who they are that you get an opportunity to experience. And vice versa, right? Whatever position you're in, whatever your reasons for reaching out, you have maybe a particular expertise, whether it's technology or sales or leadership, but whatever your expertise, you have that to offer the people that you're meeting. But beyond that, you have every experience, every book you've read, every challenge you faced, every strength of your personality, of your interests, all of these things that make up who you are as a person. So rather than looking at networking as okay, what does this person have to offer me in just the traditional business sense, and how can I get that from them? Rather, what can I learn about this person? Who is this individual that I'm experiencing right now? And how can we come together and connect and build a human bond? And it can become very exciting and a very rich experience if you start to approach everyone that you meet with that. And it's not necessarily just in business settings, right? We go into a restaurant and we think of the waiter as someone who is, okay, you're here to bring me my food, and that's the transaction. Or, the grocery store, right? Just check me out and I'm done. And we're all guilty of this, but we forget the fact that that's a human being that could maybe make us laugh, or that could has some interesting thing going on in their lives, or there's so many pieces to us as people, and we start to compartmentalize them versus showing up as a whole person. And so giving people the opportunity to show up as their entire self is an incredible gift, and something that we can start to offer people by allowing them the space to be more than just their job role or their title. So yes, we need to understand the context for the person, who they are, what they do, all of that. But then that is such a small layer of all of the things that make them a person. So rather than going into a networking experience looking at, okay, we're going to have a bunch of elevator pitches. This is what my company does, and this is who we are, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, next. We can look at each person and be like, I wonder what they care about. I wonder what makes them, what keeps them up at night, or I wonder what really brings them joy in their lives, or what are some of the happiest memories they have? What are some of the things that really matter to them as people? And then you start to build this different connection. So having that ability to reframe what we've been taught in business, that keep it extremely professional, right? There's always a fine line, but there's plenty of space to learn about this person beyond just a business setting. And even if you're thinking about the business setting, you still have an opportunity to understand what their day-to-day is like. You've probably not done their job. You've probably not experienced their particular work environment or stresses. So you can learn immense things just by being curious about what they have going on. And this, as you start to allow people to be the entirety of themselves, and you don't chop them up into pieces and compartmentalize it, you start to build a tribe of people that you trust and that they trust you, because you know them. You know more about them than just that small little bit at the top of their LinkedIn profile. So this new way of thinking hopefully will help you to approach each conversation with a little bit different mindset. Going into it, looking at each person in their entirety. So that is the new way of thinking, going from it's awkward, fake, superficial, all of that, to what can I learn from this person? How can I engage with them in a way that's really authentically me and get a chance to see who this person is? But in order to do that, you can go into it, you can be like, okay, I have this awesome mindset. Like, I really want to learn and get to know this person, but then they are very brusque with you, right? They're like, what do you want? Or like, here's my elevator pitch, or, you know, this is how we normally interact. So most people are probably going to be like that, right? Or they just have the yes and no answers. You ask them how their day is going, they're like, it's good, thanks. And you're constantly struggling to build a connection. So you're like, okay, I want to connect. I want to think about them as whole people, but I'm not sure how to do that. So there's two kind of skills that I want to teach you that will help immensely in trying to do this, and trying to discover more about this person and go beyond just the surface level. So active listening. Now, before, again, mindset, I love to focus on that. Before we get too much into these two behaviors, if you have this mindset of these people are interesting, both of these behaviors become much easier. And there's one other piece of that, curiosity, which will help even more. So if you are truly genuinely curious about who a person is, you're not going to have to practice mirroring them, leaning in, looking interested, right? You're just genuinely going to do those things. So rather than focusing on tips and tricks to look engaged, you can actually be engaged by thinking, wow, I wonder what this person has to share with me. So that curiosity is going to help you to ask better questions too, because you're genuinely trying to get somewhere. So even if you never learn the two things I'm about to share past this, and you just learn to think in this new way and to have some curiosity, you'll be great. But we can really work to be better at digging into things. One of the important things when you're trying to get to know someone better beyond just the surface is getting them to tell stories to you. If you can get people to share stories about their lives, they're going to tell you who they are. So you're going to learn about their personality, their character, their likes and dislikes, because as we're talking and they're telling us a story, it starts to shape a picture of them. And when someone tells you who they are, they're going to tell you what they think they are or what they want to be, maybe not necessarily who they are. But if they start to tell you a story about, you know, I'm standing in line at the grocery store and the woman in front of me was just taking so long. So I just, you know, told her like it was and like, you need to hurry up and whatever. Nobody's going to tell you, well, I'm kind of impatient and I'm kind of disrespectful to people that I encounter. They're not going to tell you that. But when they start to tell you a story and they become engaged in it, you can start to see how they interact with people, how they care about people, all of that. And not always to judge, right? But just to understand. So spending the time to allow them to tell you stories, the way that you get into stories is by asking open-ended and descriptive questions. Rather than asking a question, and I'm sure it's happened to all of you, where you ask a question like, hey, did you have a good day? And they're like, yep, thank you. And you're like, oh, and then you have to ask another question. So, oh, how was your week? It was good, thank you. And it can become very awkward and you're trying to get somewhere and you're being like, I want them to tell me more about themselves, but I don't know how to get there. So the way you do that is by open-ended and descriptive questioning. Open-ended would be ask them a question that they can't answer with a yes or a no. So rather than asking, let's say someone has a team that's, you know, working really hard for a deadline and they explain that to you and they're like, yeah, we're just all so busy, versus being like, hey, did you make your deadline? And they're like, yes or no, right? You can say, hey, what's the last week been like trying to reach your deadline? And, or, you know, what's been the most challenging thing about motivating your team to reach this deadline? So they can't say yes or no. They have to tell you a story. And as they tell you a story, everything that they share within that story becomes another little door for you to push on to ask more questions. So I had mentioned to all of you, I think at the beginning, that I am from New York, that I grew up there, and that I've been working with improving for 5.5 years. Even just in there, I've mentioned improving, I've mentioned how long I've been there, I've mentioned where I'm from. So you can ask me questions about any of those three things. You can't ask me a question about my mother. You can't be like, whoa, so what's your mom like? You know, what's your relationship to your mom? Or you can't, it would be strange. But 3 or 4 questions in, you could get to that. You could ask me the question, oh, what was it like for you growing up in New York? I'd be like, well, I have a large family, you know, my mom has, you know, 10 kids and blah, 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 all of that. And we all grew up together in this chaotic house in upstate New York. And you could then ask me about my mom because I've just mentioned it. But So as you get through conversations with people, they give you little prompts, they give you little bids for connection, or they make little statements that basically lets you know they're okay with talking about that subject. So if I don't bring up my mom, you can't ask me about my mom, but there's so many things that we bring up in conversation that can help you direct the conversation to become more than just surface level. And now you never have to get as deep as like asking about a relationship with your mother, right? But you can notice if a conversation is too business focused, if everybody just keeps being like, okay, we need this deadline and this and that and that, you can start to direct the conversation through these questions. You can start to ask them, okay, it seems like you're having a really tough time with your team. There's a lot of busy deadlines coming up. How are you handling, balancing that plus your day-to-day life at home, or things like that? And so then you can start to direct it more towards personal. Or if someone, and I'm sure we've all experienced that, just keeps talking on and on about personal things, and we're trying to get to the business conversation, we can start to direct it like, wow, sounds like you've got a lot going on at home. Does that interfere at all with like the things that you're doing at work? Are you able to manage both? And so you can start to move people in the direction you want to go in the conversation. It's easy to think that when we are talking, we're in power, but the most powerful time is really when we are asking questions and directing the conversation and really spending our time and energy to understand the other person in front of us. So making that time and caring about what's going on with that other person is so, so valuable. Another thing with letting people tell stories is that most of us are 100% focused or 98% focused on what we are trying to accomplish. So we're thinking about our family, our job, our life, our health, right? But if you take even 5 minutes just to think about someone else and be like, I wonder how Max is doing today. I wonder what his morning was like. I wonder what frustrations he experienced this week, and on. When even just 5 minutes of that can be so powerful, and then to give him a space to really bring you into his world is something that is such a wonderful gift. So these are just some good practices. The descriptive part of it, again, is using the little pieces that they tell you within the conversation to keep it moving forward. So if they share any details about their lives, those details are things that you can now ask a second question. And so within 3 or 4 minutes, you'll have content for days. You have 10, 15, 20 questions you could ask because they've said so much. Another thing that can happen, though, is as they're telling you stories, you'll start to hear things that make you feel connected to them. And so, for example, because I said I'm from New York, it would be easy for anybody who's from New York to immediately respond with like, oh my gosh, I'm also from New York. But what you've now done is taken the conversation and made it about you, which you're not trying to do. You are trying to connect, but all of a sudden your connection becomes about you. And it's still totally fine. It's valid and it's a way to connect people, but it would be more powerful if you took the time to ask 3 or 4 questions about their experience growing up in New York, what it was like, if they liked it, if they didn't, all of that. And then once you have a bigger picture, once they've gotten to share a little bit more about who they are, then you can say, it's really cool to hear your experience because I actually grew up in New York as well. And so that does a couple of things. It creates the space for them to keep talking, which makes them feel that you care and understand. But then it also shows that you're listening because you brought it back and you mentioned, okay, I heard you, I understand, I'm listening, and I have a connection point with that. And then it also gives them something to attach to as well. They now start to feel more connected to you. So the more data you gain from these stories, the more of these little opportunities you have to say, hey, I'm also like that, or I'm not like that. And one of the things that can happen too is, for example, what if somebody's talking about something that you don't have any interest in? Like, I don't know anything about skateboarding, but I feel I could have a 2 or 3 hour conversation with someone about skateboarding if I was genuinely curious about them and their passion for it. So if it's something you don't really care about, you can care about the person and think about like, wow, why are they so enthralled with this thing? And you can ask them to teach you about it too, right? Like, that's something where I don't know anything about skateboarding. If someone's a big skateboard fanatic, they can tell me so much and they will still feel connected even just by teaching me about something I don't know. And if I'm not that interested, I can analyze why they are so interested in that. And that to me is probably interesting, right? Human beings, how they tick, all of that. So taking the time to be curious, to ask these different questions, and to help us navigate the conversation smoothly really makes for building deeper, stronger connections.
Hey, Bethany, do you have, we had one that come in, do you know of any books that can help people with like open-ended questions or active listening?
Yes, so there actually, if you Google powerful questions, that's there's a deck of cards that one of my friends gave me when I joined Improving, and you can literally practice those cards. But I think there might be a book that goes along with it. So both of these phrases, if you were to Google them, I'm sure you'll see many books on it. I do give some book resources at the end that are more going to cover a lot of these things, but I would just Google powerful questions, and I think you'll see a book or at least a deck of cards that has some really good examples.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, cool. One other comment. So it's easy for our society to celebrate extroverts as people that are going to be really good at networking, that are going to be the most capable of developing these strong relationships, right? And this is why we hire them in a lot of those externally facing roles. Now, I do think that introverts can be more drained by so much time with people, so it does still make sense. But I believe that introverts can be and have even more powerful networking skills than extroverts, even because of their ability to really take a step back, not be talking as much, right? And ask good questions. So I remember I was interviewing for a job in Chicago, and I went in and sat with the CEO, and he was telling me about his son and his lemonade stand that he had just started and all of his business goals, the things that he was trying to accomplish. And we sat and talked for a couple of hours. And when I say talked, I mean I kept asking questions and he kept talking. And I learned so much about this person, which also, when you learn so much about a person, you can't help but start to care about them, right? So I started to develop this connection to him and he to me. And then I don't think he ever looked at my resume. Like, I'm not even sure that he called any of the references or anything, but he just told me at the end of that meeting, he said, you know, if you ever want to move to Chicago, you have a job here. And so it was just in that first conversation, just truly giving him the space to share about what was going on in his world and his life, gave him that feeling of, wow, I could trust this person to help me in my business. So there's extremely powerful things that can come out of just learning to ask questions, and you don't have to be extroverted to be really, really good at networking. Any questions or comments, Max, before we keep going?
No, I think you actually hit on an area. We had a question that came in. I was waiting for it because I think I remembered, hearing this before we were talking about extroverts and introverts. And it was basically, what tips do you have for a moderately introverted person who does fine with office and social settings when you're with established peers, but have problems at conferences or conventions? How do you overcome the apprehension of meeting complete strangers?
That is a great question. I would love that one. So make one friend. So oftentimes when we go to a conference, it can be so overwhelming. There's so many people, but really, if you focus your attention rather than talking to 15 people and not really getting to know anyone, really, who is it that you're sitting next to? And you can do something like sit at a different place after each break or something like that, right? But just make one friend and ask them the questions, spend time with them. If you go away from a conference and you've really made one strong connection, that's okay. Like, these things start to compound on themselves. And so it's more important to build meaningful connections than to build many connections. And meaningful can lead to many if that is your goal, right? But we don't necessarily, depending on your role, we don't necessarily need many connections. That can become overwhelming. But if you have a strong group of individuals that are supporting you as your professional network, that want to see you win, if you take a couple of conferences a year and there's 4 or 5 people, that's awesome, right? And then you just keep adding to that as you go. Now, if you're in sales, I have lots of different strategies as it relates to conferences. I don't know if that's coming specifically from that group, but for the general individual that's attending a conference, that's trying to learn and then build connections with either peers or leaders or mentors, really, doesn't have to be a lot. And if you think about how you interact with your best friend, now there's things you would share with them that you wouldn't share with a group, right? But you can have that comfort of like, this is a human being that has plenty of human experiences just like me, and they are probably also uncomfortable or like having difficulty connecting. And so if I can just ask them a good question, go up and introduce myself and ask them one good question to where they're telling me a story, now we're good. Now we're going, and we're building this human bond that can be really, really valuable. Other questions in the chat before I keep going?
Not at this time.
Okay, great. Okay, so I wanted to leave a good amount of time for questions, and I don't know how much time we have this morning, but a few things that I wanted to kind of recap as it relates to the behaviors we learn in this new mindset. The difference between, this is one of my favorite quotes, the difference between two strangers and two friends is that someone had the courage to go first. So taking the time to really practice some of these behaviors and then reach out, you have no idea the amount of beautiful connections and friendships that can come out of that. But you may walk past a person every single day that could have been your best friend and you just don't know, or could have told you about something really incredible that changed your life. You have no idea. So just know and have the courage to reach out to people and recognize that most people are very grateful for, especially in a social setting, right? Like all of us have some level of social anxiety. And so if someone comes up to me or any of you and is genuinely kind and curious and interested in who we are without an agenda, without being transactional, without, oh, they're trying to get something from me. If they just come up to be like, hey, I see you over there. You seem interesting. Let's have a conversation. And they have the behaviors to keep the conversation going, knowing how to ask good questions, knowing how to navigate that. That's really comfortable and really nice for other people. So the second piece, again, it's not about you. Like there's so much fulfillment that can come from realizing that we have so much to offer the people around us. And it's easy and traditional where people say, hey, how can I help you? But that is not necessarily that helpful, because if you just met a person, one, you don't know if you want to help them. You don't know if you trust them. So most people know that inherently, and they're like, you're not really going to help me. You don't really mean that, right? And secondly, even if you really mean it, you don't know anything about them to be able to genuinely help them. You don't, and they don't know anything about you to be able to genuinely help you. So it's more about discovering and understanding a person and getting to know them without any agenda, without even an agenda of trying to help them. I remember every conversation I would have at the beginning of my career, I was always like, what am I going to be able to do to help them? I want to think of something. I want to think of something. But I stopped doing that, to where now when I connect with a person, I'm just like, who is this person? What's going on in their life? I'm fascinated by human beings. I want to understand. And maybe I can, as we're going through the conversation, I'm like, it seems that they need encouragement, or it seems that they need to tell more stories about themselves, or, you know, they're looking for advice on this particular thing, or that makes me think I could build a connection for them. But I don't say the, how can I help you? I will say, I shift that a little bit. I'll say, you know, I really enjoyed all the information you gave me about yourself and what you have going on. I will be thinking of ways that I can help you. So that also takes the pressure off of them to be like, well, what is Bethany's skill set? What can she do to help me? And I will take on the responsibility of like, you know, if I genuinely mean this, if I really want to help this person, I need to understand who they are, what they have going on, and then I can make that connection. So the more you do this, and it's awesome. Like a lot of times people will ask me the question, what can I do to help you? And I'm like, honestly, I don't really know you, so I don't know. But I'll say, I do have a lot of people in my network, a lot of people that I'm trying to help in their careers and the things they have going on. So as I get to know you better, I might see some places where you'll be able to support the people that I know. And so if I do reach out to you at some point and just ask for help, maybe a college student that needs some advice, things like that, if you're willing to spend some time with them, that would mean a lot to me. That's how you could help me. And so what happens is you start to have this abundance mindset of, I'm not going into this needing something or hoping that they do something for me. I'm going into this really trying to give and really trying to understand. And then even if they want to help me, who is it that I can help with their help? And what happens is your needs will be met as well, right? Like even if in a job interview, or right? You can still say those things. I'm looking for a new opportunity, all of that, but they will remember and they will start to engage and really want to see you win as well. And what I found is when I reach out and ask for help for myself, sometimes it's hit or miss. But when I reach out and ask for help for someone else, I'm almost 100% response, because it's like I am asking for someone else. There's a genuineness to that. I'm truly trying to help. And I think all of us have that inside of us. We want to see other people win. We want to care for other people. And so we just have to keep that in mind as we're navigating these kinds of conversations. And Max, feel free to interrupt at any point.
Yeah, there is actually Kim wrote in, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase because I think I know what she's asking. What's your cadence for checking in when you're trying to build those relationships? And then there was a follow-up to that was and any tools that you use for that?
Absolutely. So if you think about a friend that you've known for 20 years, even if you didn't talk to them the rest of your life, you could be 80 years old and they would still know your name and know your family. But if there's somebody that you just met yesterday, in 3 days, they could completely forget about you. So I actually have a cadence of, most people have like maybe once a month reaching out, but that I found doesn't really work. What I prefer to do is, let's say I meet you at a conference yesterday. If you, and there's an idea that if you follow up 3 times on different mediums, they kind of start to remember you. So I might send them an email afterwards immediately. Thank you so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it. Say something specific, right, from the conversation. I really enjoyed hearing about your experience growing up in New York. And then I might a week later send a handwritten note like, hey, this made me think of you, or something like that. And maybe one other touch point. So what I do is, the initial stages are really critical of making sure that you build a strong enough bond at the beginning that then you don't have to be as in contact consistently because they know you. So people I've worked with for 10 years, like it's or even somebody I've worked with for a year, or someone I've talked to consistently for a year, I don't have to engage with as much. So I kind of usually like back people off. It's so the first couple of months of getting to know someone, you're much more in touch. By the end of the first year, if you've done a really good job at the beginning of staying connected, it can be much more every couple of months, right? And then, because you also don't want to wear them out, you don't want to every single month be reaching out to everyone in your network, right? So I've found that staggered approach has helped a lot, and I've been maintaining relationships for a decade now that, I can reach out to somebody and it can have been a year or 2 years, but because I was really invested at the beginning, they'll still remember.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to keep talking, but if there's other questions. So going back to the thinking, right? This is a long-term investment, creating value for others, creating value for yourself by creating value for others. One of my favorite quotes, Zig Ziglar, he talks about how when we get what we want, when we help enough other people get what they want. And I actually added to that. I was like, we get what we want by helping other people get what they want, but then eventually what we want becomes what we want starts to be what others want. So at this point, for me, I get extremely excited when I can connect to people or when I can help someone find a job. And what I found is, with this abundance mindset, when I'm meeting new people, I'm not even, and I'm in sales, I'm in business development, but my first thought when I meet someone is not, oh, do they have a deal for me? Oh, do they have an opportunity? But it's like, wow, who is this person? Can I connect to them? What do they have going on? I wonder who needs to meet them. Like, they have all this wisdom about whatever. I wonder if they have any job openings in their team. They seem like they're a good team leader. And so what I want has become helping other people, and you just keep adding value, and you find that your needs are met consistently. You have people that trust you that are going to reach out, make referrals, right? Because another part of humanity, and we don't want to capitalize on this too much, it's just because if you focus on this, it takes away from the mindset, right? And people can feel when you're being inauthentic. But when you are doing so much for other people, human beings feel this need to reciprocate. So that's not why you do it, right? You should forget that you've ever helped someone, right? Just help them and move on with your lives. But a lot of times those people will never forget that you supported and helped them, and they'll want to return the favor. So that cycle becomes where you just keep giving to the world and you find that you have more and more to give. And then the behaviors we went over: active listening, powerful questions, and taking initiative, right? And then having this authenticity. One other comment is that it can be easy, and we want to avoid this, of if we're too excited about the question asking process, people can start to feel like they're being grilled, like you're in the CIA, why are you asking me all these questions? So you do want to periodically invest into the conversation as well, rather than just gathering all this information about the other person. When you do hear things that interest you, responding, letting them know who you are, what you care about. And most of them won't have these valuable skills, so they're not going to know how to get you into a story about your life, which is why it's important for you to have honestly asked yourself powerful questions before and really listen to yourself, spent time journaling, all that. So then when people ask you who you are, you don't give them just the surface level and hope that they can help you get into your deeper parts of you. Like, you've already explored that for yourself, so you're able to say, you know, I'm really passionate about helping people think differently. I'm really passionate about giving people new mindsets so that their life is easier. Or I really care about these kinds of organizations, or my personality is like this, or I love to do these hobbies. And so then just give them information about yourself. And also when you do that, it frees them to talk more about themselves. So if I talk about my hobbies, you feel much freer to talk about your hobbies, right? But if I always keep it to business, maybe it would feel very uncomfortable for you. So you have to be that person to take the initiative and to know yourself enough to be able to express who you are to others, so that they can connect to you as much as you are connecting to them. And then you had asked the question that I don't think I answered about a system for it. So I use a system called Contactually, but it's I've been maintaining a network for 10 years. And so I have a lot of people and a lot of moving parts. So I actually pay monthly for that. But if you're looking for a very simple system that's completely inexpensive, it's free, is I would just, after a conversation with someone, you've spent a lot of time learning about them. And even if it's the most amazing conversation, you're going to start to lose details because so much of life happens. What I do, or what I used to do, is take a Word document for each person. So let's say I just met Max. I would just write Max Day at the top. That's the name of the document, and then write the details from the conversation. And this, one, it helps solidify in your brain who he is, all of that. But two, it gives you some details. If he mentioned his children's names or that he has pets, right? Those are things that you might forget, but you could always go back. And so then you say that in each conversation you have with him, just add a little bit more. So you start to have almost like a biography of each person in your network. And then you save them in a folder, right? All of us have computers, by date last updated. And then you can see who, you just go to the bottom and you can see how many people you haven't talked to since last year, and you reach out to those. And then you just keep updating it, and that becomes your little network. So there's plenty of other tools out there, but this is something you could start today, and it's really easy. The other thing that I say is it's easy for people to be like, oh, I have to go build a network. But I'm like, you already have a network. Every single one of us knows someone. And so thinking about the people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just, oh, this person's really, a leader in their company, or they're doing all these interesting things. It could be someone that you just really value their humanity. Like you admire their character, you think they have similar values to you. And so for me, I'm keeping up with college students, with like teenagers. It's not, even though I speak mostly to executives, CIOs, directors, based on my work, right? I meet those 21-year-olds that are like brilliant, and I'm like, okay, I see that you have so much to offer the world. I want to invest and care for you. So it's not just about my network being people that have value to me as it relates to business, but it's also people that you have value for and that you want to invest in.
That's a good point. We had a question that came in, Bethany, and I think you kind of hit on it right there, which is, somebody wrote, I'm working full time. What are suggestions on how to find the time to be able to build networks? And I think you made a good point right there, is that, there's a network around you.
Yes. And most of the people, I remember driving somewhere with two best friends, and I'd never met one of them before. And so I was asking her questions. And when we got to the end of the drive, my other friend, she's like, I've been best friends with her for like 5 years. And I learned so much about my best friend just from that. So you could take these questions and these skills to your family dinner and learn so much about your family, you know? So it's not just that. Don't assume that you really, really know the people around you yet. Spend the time to invest in them. And then you can add one. I got the question on the last time I gave this presentation about, you know, if you're working full time and you're not in somewhere that supports networking, like how do you do that? And I would say just try to have one lunch meeting a week, or try to have one conversation a week. All of us have, you know, 30 minutes to an hour somewhere in the week that we can say, hey, I'd really love to spend some time with you. And you can look through, probably most of you have LinkedIn if you're on this call. You can look through who's someone maybe that you connected to briefly a while ago that you'd like to reconnect with, or who's someone you've been wanting to get to know. And even one person a week is 52 people by the end of the year. And then within 2 or 3 years, that's a lot of people, right? So it doesn't have to be extravagant, but it's quality over quantity. The more that you invest, my first mentor told me, keep what you've got to get more. Like the more that you really care for what you have, the more you're able to add. And it's beautiful. Like I have been maintaining relationships for 10 years, and those are when someone's seen you through your career for 10 years, you start to really, really care about them. And so the thing is that those people I worked with 10 years ago will never forget the conversations that we had. And so when I'm 70 years old, right, or however long I've been working, I'll have decades and decades of professional relationships that have been maintained. And when I say maintained, it doesn't mean that we are talking, right? Like someone that I worked with 10 years ago, I might not reach out to for another 2 or 3 years because I might not have time and energy, right? But you've made a little space in their heart and their mind that you're kind of forever connected. So it's really beautiful in that way.
Yeah, just real quick, Kale had re-asked, what was the name of that software and is it worthwhile? So Contactually, I actually put a link in the chat for anybody if they want to just click on that. But they also asked whether or not you think it's worthwhile or worth the money.
Okay, so I would say if you are in a role, it depends. For me, being in a role where I'm managing like, I don't know, maybe 1,000 contacts, it's definitely necessary, something like that. And I like that it's very streamlined and simple. And it has, different bucket features and things like that. So it's fairly user friendly. I would say if you're in a role where you're maintaining a lot of relationships and it can be hard to juggle all of that and know who you reached out to last, I think that's good. If you're maintaining under 100 relationships, I would say it's not worth the money. It's like $40 a month, $40 a month. So to me, I think there's simpler, maybe even free systems out there. But when you're managing upwards of, 100, 200 contacts and above, maybe that starts to be something that you'll use.
Awesome, thanks.
So I apologize that my blog is not updated. I've been doing a lot more speaking than I have been writing. So if you look at the blog post timestamps, they'll be old, but I believe there's still a lot of value in them. So I have them up on my blog, bethanyhilton.com. You can also send me emails there, and I put my contact as well. But definitely asking questions to me. I love to get those. I'm happy to hop on a conversation and get to know you, all of that. But feel free to browse there. The 2 books I'll recommend, one is more mindset and one is more the systems behind it. How to Win Friends and Influence People is an old book, but it's got a lot of valuable content in it. And for those that haven't read it, I think it does a great job of breaking down this mindset that we talked about. The second one is Never Eat Alone. This is going to get really deep into the systems and how to think about conferences and how to think about active listening, powerful questions. I think those things are in there. Just really, really good resource. Don't get overwhelmed. That book, the first 2 times I read it, I was like, there's no way, I can't do this. He's like constantly on his phone, and it was BlackBerry day. So he's like, I'm messaging about 100 people a day on my BlackBerry. I'm like, oh my God, but just pick and choose from that. There's a lot of valuable content there. You don't have to do everything that he does. He's known across the world as like a master networker. And which ironically, funny enough, I was like, of course I have to meet him. So he's still on my list. We've exchanged some emails, and because I got to him through my other network, but I'm like, I talk about you all the time. I should be spending some time with you too. But it's great. The book is awesome and highly recommend. So I think we have a little bit more time for questions, but I'll also put up my information up here while we answer any final questions.
Awesome, Bethany. Yeah, we do actually have one final, because we've kind of answered most of them as we've gone through. But you know, somebody had posted in that said, you know, what are some ways that you've used for thoughtfully outreaching and thoughtful connections? I know, you know, I heard you mention earlier, you know, about writing personal notes and things like that. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yes. So for making one, when you've had if you've already met someone, right? That conversation, when you're asking these powerful questions, then you have a lot of data for following up and reaching out. And even if they don't respond the first time or so, right? If they mention that they're going on vacation, you can write that in your notes so you remember, and you can ask them about their vacation. So if you've already met them and talked to them, that's really easy to segue into meaningful, thoughtful things, because you have a lot of data on them. Hopefully you've written it down in some sort of a little notepad, and so you can be like, oh, they have 2 kids that are 12 and 13. I wonder if they saw the new movie that's out on Pixar. It'd probably be really good for them, right? So you can start to think about them. But if you haven't had a chance to meet them yet, what I normally do, and again, people are overwhelmed, so sometimes they respond something, sometimes they don't, but is I will look them up. I'll do some research on them, and I'll figure out what I can from their online presence. What do they care about? Who are they as people? And then I'll try to craft a thoughtful note of just, hey, I noticed that you support the, you know, SPCA or whatever. I'm a dog owner. I've rescued my dog recently and would love to catch up with you, learn about your work, but also hear why you're passionate about that or something. I'll also notice who they're connected to. If they're connected to people I know, I will ask them how they know that person. So I'll try to find some common ground to connect. But sometimes I'll even just ask, I'll say, hey, I you know, came across your LinkedIn. You seem really interesting. I'd love to have a conversation with you. And then just go from there. So it's much easier in person to connect in a space that people are jointly there and understand that. But if you are reaching out to people, just to make it as personal as possible, do your research and make sure that it comes across that you're not just, hey, I want something from you, but I want to develop a genuine connection to you. And people will respond. If they respond, they'll usually respond well.
Awesome. Well, that was our last question. So I just want to say thank you guys all for attending today's virtual Learn to Learn. And Bethany, thank you so much for sharing. The recording for this session will be available from our virtual events page, which is improving.com/virtual-events. Have a great weekend, everybody. Again, thanks, Bethany.
Thanks, Max.